Alright, so we got our new machine here, and what we need to do is put everything together so we can start using it. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is build our table. So we have the frame here, it's in a bunch of pieces. We got some hardware, and we're going to start putting this thing together. So I'm just going to unwrap this the rest of the way here. Okay, so once we get everything unpacked, the first thing we're going to want to do is start connecting our legs with this crossbar here. So I'm just going to put this bolt in. I'm just going to get this snug so that we can still move everything, because we want to be able to square this table up once we get everything assembled. Alright, now I'm going to flip it over and attach the other side. It's a good idea if you're doing this on your upholstery table to have a piece of cardboard or something underneath so you don't scratch up your nice table. Alright, now for this next step, what we need to do is start assembling the throttle pedal. First we need to install these nylon bushings, and then we can install the hinges. And on this first one, for whatever reason, I had a lot of difficulty. I actually had to use a socket and hammer it on. You can see here I'm just using a socket that fits right over the hinge so that I'm able to tap on that bushing there. It took me a couple tries, and I was patient and got it on there, and then after that the second one went on with no problem. I'm not sure if maybe there was too much paint on there, or if one of those bushings was a little bit smaller than the other, but either way it worked out fine. Alright, now we can go ahead and install the hinges. And those just slide on pretty easily. They're held in place once we bolt this to the bar. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bolt the throttle pedal to the bar here. You can see here how I have it mounted off to one side. I thought that this was going to be more comfortable for me, so I wanted to try it that way. But you'll see later on at the end of the video, I have to actually move it because it wasn't comfortable at all, and it just didn't work very well. So I suggest putting it right in the center. That seems to be the good spot that works for pretty much all machines. Alright, so right here you want to make sure that the hinges are nice and square to the pedal so that it doesn't hit anything when you're pushing the pedal down. Alright, that looks like it's working pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten everything up. Alright, once we have the throttle assembled, we're ready to install this on the frame of the machine, and we want to make sure that we have the part of the pedal with those holes facing towards the back of the machine, because that's going to be where we attach the bracket that will attach to the motor. So I'm going to go ahead, put this on here and get it centered up. You can adjust this really to any spot that is comfortable for you. I find that it works best centered in the machine from front to back. So for whatever reason, the holes on the left leg and the right leg, they were just a little bit different. I'm not sure if it was maybe a mistake in the manufacturing process or whatnot. In order to have the bar in the center on the left leg, I wasn't able to get a bolt in each one of the holes. So it's alright, it worked out just fine like this. I had to put 2 bolts in one of the slots, but it's not a big deal. And I like to just use a tape measure to make sure that everything's square from left to right. Okay, so here I'm going to use a square and make sure that everything is lined up nicely before I tighten these bolts down. This may not seem that important, but it is always nice to have a table that's set up nice and square so that it's not wobbling around, and just that it looks good. It only takes a couple extra minutes to do this. Now I'm going to do the other side, again checking to make sure everything's nice and square. Okay, and once we're done with that, we can move on to that crossbar. So I'm going to make sure all of this is square, and we're going to tighten these bolts down as well. Alright, so we're going to tighten up this last bolt here, and then we're going to be ready to start mounting the tabletop. Alright, so here I'm just going to put these bolts in temporarily, because when I flip this over, I don't want these adjustable legs to fall out on me. And then after we get the tabletop mounted to the frame, we'll adjust the overall height of the table to match our sewing table. Alright, so this is the measurement that they are giving us in the manual for where they want to mount the frame to the tabletop. So I'm going to go ahead and start marking this measurement on the table so we know where to line it up. So along this edge, I'm just going to mark a 1/2 inch line. And then on this back edge, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches. And then once you have your lines marked out, you can go ahead and line your frame up, and what we're going to do is mark the holes that we need to pre-drill for the bolts. So I'm just going to put a mark right in the center so I know where to drill. So these are the bolts we're going to use, and I'm going to show you a little trick, and it's going to help you so that you don't accidentally drill all the way through the table. What we're going to do is we're just going to use a socket, and we're going to adjust the drill bit to the length that we need. And what this socket it's going to do is it's going to stop us from drilling too far. So it's a little bit short here. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm going to slide that socket back over. You're going to see that it's the perfect length for the screws that we're using. Using the socket like this just makes it so you don't even have to worry about drilling too far. Alright, and once you have your holes drilled, you can go ahead and line your frame back up to those marks we made, and you can install the screws. I like to just tap them in a little bit to get them started. I'm going to leave the first one a little bit loose so that I can adjust everything once I get the second one in and make sure that it's lined up just perfectly. Alright, I'm going to tighten those up. Now we can move on to the other side. So again here I'm just going to mark 1.5 inches, same like we did on the other side. Now we can line our frame up to that line. Then what I'm going to do is just make sure that the frame is square to the table. Once you have everything square, you can go ahead and mark a line. I'm going to mark our holes as well. Now we just need to drill the holes, same like we did on the other side. Again, I'm using the socket here. Alright, now that I'm getting this last bolt in here, we can go ahead and tighten everything up. So I'm just going to make a little adjustment here, and then I'm going to lock everything down. Alright, now we need to take a measurement of the height of your table so that we can set the height of the sewing machine table to the same height. I have my bolts snugged up so that it's going to hold everything in place for me, and I'm just going to use a tape measure and I'm going to tap everything to the height that I'm looking for, which on this table is 30 inches. It could be different on yours depending on how you built your table. Alright, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to tighten these up now. Alright, so it's a good idea to have 4 bolts on there just so that once you set it, nothing's going to change. Okay, now I can do the other side. Alright, I'm happy with the height on this side, so I'm going to finish locking down all these bolts. Alright, now we can go ahead and install this drawer, and it's pretty easy. Basically there's just these 2 guides that hold the drawer in place, and you just have to screw them down to the table. So I'm going to line everything up right now. I like to have a little bit of a gap so that you don't bump that with your knee or anything. Alright, so I'm just going to put that guide on there. Make sure I keep the drawer nice and square on the table. Okay, that looks pretty good to me there, so I'm just going to start installing all of these screws. You don't need to drill a pilot hole or anything. They're pretty small, so they should just go in by hand pretty easily. Alright, so one thing you want to do is make sure when you're screwing these down that you don't actually distort the hinge by making it too tight, because that'll make the drawer not slide very well. So I'm just checking to make sure that everything is staying straight with my straight edge here. Alright, so everything's looking good on that side. Now I'm going to start screwing down the other one. And if you have a little bit of trouble getting these started, you can take a hammer and just tap these down, and it's going to get them started nicely for you. Alright, now what we need to do is install the pulley onto the motor. And the way they want you to do that is they have a little keyway on the pulley that you have to insert a key onto the shaft of the motor, and that's what holds the pulley from spinning while the motor is moving. So what they want you to do in the directions is put the pulley on and then slide the keyway down through the shaft so that it locks the pulley onto the shaft. And then you're supposed to put a nut with a washer on. But the problem I'm having here is that this keyway just doesn't fit into the shaft on the motor. So what we're going to have to do is sand this down. I tried a bunch of different ways to try and get this to work, and I think that something was just a little bit off, so we needed to sand down that key just a little bit to make it fit right. Alright, so here I'm just going to start sanding down the edge of that key. I'm going to be careful not to go too far. Make sure I keep checking as I'm going to see if it's fitting. Alright, so that's fitting pretty good. We can go ahead and install the pulley now. You can see here how I'm sliding that keyway down onto the shaft. After we get the key in there, we can go ahead and put the washer, the lock washer, and then the nut on. Now I'm just going to hold on to the pulley as tight as I can so that it doesn't spin, and we're going to lock this nut down. Okay, now we're ready to install the motor on the table. And first we have to install the bolts that the motor mounts to. So these are just some regular lag bolts with a rounded top. I'm going to put them in from the face and just hammer them in. And then we'll flip the table back down and we can line up the motor. Alright, so I'm going to slide the motor onto those bolts we just installed. And then I'm going to put all the hardware on, but I'm going to leave everything loose so that we can line up the motor to the table. Alright, so I'm going to take my straight edge here and hold it up against the pulley so we can see where the motor is sitting. And what we want to do is to get it nice and centered, because the belt has to go in between that groove that's on the table, And we want it to be centered, one, so that it looks nice, and two, so that it doesn't touch the table and destroy our belt while we're using the machine. Alright, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to tighten all the bolts down to lock the motor in place. Alright, now we can go ahead and install the linkage for the throttle pedal. That's what I'm doing here. There's just this bracket that attaches to the pedal, and then there's this adjustable linkage bar that goes from the motor to that bracket on the pedal. Alright, once I have that bracket bolted on, I'm going to start to install the linkage. Basically, the way this linkage works is there's two separate bars and there's a little clamp that holds them together. When you loosen that clamp, you can adjust the length of the linkage. You also want to make sure that when you're installing the bracket and this linkage that it lines up pretty straight with the motor. So I'm going to get that set right where I want it and then tighten up that clamp. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and tighten all the rest of the bolts on this pedal assembly. Here I'm just checking to make sure everything's straight, and then I'm going to tighten this up. And as you can see, our pedal works nicely. It's moving the throttle on the motor. Alright, next step is we're going to install the oil pan. So first thing we need to do is install these rubber bumpers, and this is what the actual sewing machine sits on. Okay, and now we need to install these rubber hinges into the table, and this is what the hinge on the sewing machine sits inside of, so that you can rock the machine up so you can access all the oil and everything underneath the machine. Now we're gonna press this oil pan into the table. It's a bit of a tight fit, so you might have to give it some persuasion. You want to make sure the rubber, it's sitting pretty flush with the table, just like I have it here. Now I'm going to install the peg for the foot lifter, and this is just the little piece that attaches the knee lever to the actual machine and will lift the foot when you rock your knee sideways, and you'll understand how that works when I show you installing the knee lever later. Then we're just going to install that peg there, and what that does is when you rock the machine back, that catches the machine from just falling down on your table. Alright, so these are the hinges, and we're just going to install them on the machine just like that. They slide in with no problems. Now we're going to put the machine into those rubber hinge pieces that we installed on the table earlier. Now this machine, it's really heavy, so if you need somebody to help you with this, make sure that you have help. It weighs about 60-70 pounds. And you can see there, we're rocking the machine back, and it stands right on that peg that we installed earlier. Okay, now we need to check the rotation of the motor. So we're going to plug it in, press the throttle pedal, and we want to make sure that everything is spinning counterclockwise. Okay, so you can see here that the motor is spinning counterclockwise, so that's good. If it wasn't, you're going to want to take a look in the manual, and there's a setting where you can reverse the rotation of the motor. Okay, now we need to install the hand wheel and the cover for the hand wheel. First thing we're going to do is remove these screws in the machine, and these are what we're going to use to mount that cover. Alright, now we're just going to screw that cover on. Okay, and on the bottom hole of this cover, I felt like the screw head was not big enough to really hold that cover on properly. So I'm just going to add this washer just to be safe. Alright, once we have that cover on, next thing we need to do is install the hand wheel. So I'm going to remove that posi pin there, and we're going to twist off this locking nut, and it's reverse thread, so make sure you're aware of that. Now we're just going to slide on the hand wheel. Now we can install that locking nut back on. Remember, it's reverse thread. And then we can put that posi pin back in. You just have to find the hole. And that posi pin is actually a nice little feature. What that does is it makes it so that when you're winding the bobbin, you can disengage the actual machine from the motor so that you're not just freewheeling the machine without actually sewing anything. So that'll help reduce the wear on your machine. Okay, now it's time to install the belt. And what we need to do is loosen the tensioning screw on the motor so that we can rock the motor forward before we install the belt. So now that I got that loose, it seems like that main bolt is a little tight, so I'm going to loosen this one as well. Alright, so I'm just going to move the motor forward a little bit here, and that's going to make sure that when we install the belt, it's not too tight and we don't damage the belt. So I'm going to drop the belt down through the table here, install it on the pulley of the motor, and then I'm going to come on the top and install it on the hand wheel. And now what we can do is rock the machine back. The next step, we need to set the tension on the belt. And we're going to do that by pushing the motor forward, and then we can lock the motor in place with that lock-in screw that we loosened up earlier. And you just want to get a nice tension on the belt. You don't want to make it crazy tight, but you also don't want it loose. Alright, I'm happy with the tension on the belt here, so I'm going to tighten everything up. Now what we can do is finish installing the rest of that belt cover. And the way this piece works is there's just a little pin that it slides into on the top, and then there's another bolt on the bottom. And again, I don't like how small the head of this screw is, so I'm going to add another washer on this one as well. Again, you want to install this cover making sure that it's not touching the belt or the hand wheel. So you just want to double check one more time that the belt is nice and centered, and you can see here that it is. Alright, now it's time to install the bobbin winder. And the first thing we're going to want to do is line this up with the belt on the machine, and we want about a 1/4 inch away, and you want to make sure that it's in the released position when you're doing this. So once we get that lined up, we can go ahead and square it up to the table. And that's what I'm doing here with this tape measure. And once it's square, we can mark our holes. Now I'm just going to put a towel in the oil pan there so we don't get any dust when I'm drilling the pilot holes for the bobbin winder. Once you have your holes drilled, you can go ahead and install the screws. And you can see I installed the screws in the very middle so that we'll have plenty of adjustment if we ever need to move this forward or backward. Alright, I'm just going to clean this machine very quick because it was very oily from shipping. I think they did that just so nothing gets rusted and just as a precaution. I'm just going to use some simple green to clean this off. Okay, now it's time to install that light that they included with this machine. And they gave us a couple pieces of hardware here, some zip ties and wire clamps we can use to run the wire for this light. So I'm going to show you how I ended up doing this. Basically, there's a magnetic bottom to the light and I just put that right there on top of the machine. I'm pretty sure that's the best spot and where I'm going to want to keep it. And then I ran the wire, making sure that it's not touching any moving parts, and I used 2 wire clamps to attach the wire to some existing screws on the machine. Alright, now I'm just going to run that wire down that same hole that the belt runs through. And we're going to want to make sure that we zip tie this wire so that it's not going to touch that belt while we're using the machine. And you can see that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to make sure it's nice and tight and completely out of the way of that belt. Okay, now there's a plug on the back of the motor for this light so that every time you turn your machine on, that light will have power. Now I'm just going to wrap up the extra wire and zip tie it so that it looks nice. Then we'll just cut the extra piece of those zip ties off to make everything look good. So here you can see exactly how I ran the wire. There's no moving parts touching the wire, and that's the important part that we want here. Okay, now it's time to install the thread stand. These are all the pieces that comes with this. It looks like a lot, but it's actually really easy to install. I'm going to show you how to do it right now. Okay, so we're going to start off with this base pole. It's the one with the large nut on the bottom. We're just going to unscrew this here. I'm going to take off one metal washer. I'm going to leave the rubber washer and another metal washer on top. I'm going to stick that through the hole on the table. I'm going to install the washer on the bottom and then tighten that nut up, and it's going to hold everything to the table nicely. Alright, next thing we need to do is install this connector clamp. It has a little stop on the inside, so just slide it on, and when you hit that stop you can go ahead and tighten it up. Now we're going to install the next bar. Same thing, just slide it in until it stops and then tighten it up. Now we need to install the bar that the bobbins sit on, and this just slides right over the top of the bar, and we can tighten that screw and it's going to clamp right down for us. Alright, now I'm going to install the bars that the actual spool threads sit on, and it's just one nut. It's pretty straightforward. Alright, once you have these on, you can tighten them up with a wrench. Okay, now we're going to install the plate that the spool sits on. And it just slides right over top. There's a little groove in the plastic that lines up with the groove on the bar. So just make sure you line those up and you push it down. It's kind of a pressure fit, but it's pretty easy to get on. Now we're just going to slide the foam pad over top. And then they have these little cones that slide over top. They hold those foam pads down, and then it also, I think, helps the spool from sliding around. Okay, now we need to install the thread guide. This is the last piece to go on. This is what the thread goes through those holes on the top of this bar and then down to the machine. And you want to make sure that it's lined up nicely with the lower bar. And it's the same thing, just slide it over top, tighten the screw. I'm just going to install that rubber cap back on the top there. And everything is looking good on this. Alright, now what we need to do is install the knee pad for the knee lever. And all we need to do is just slide this rubber piece over the metal part here. And this knee lever is what allows you to lift the foot up by moving your knee sideways. That way you don't always have to be reaching behind the machine to use your hand. Alright, we just need to slide this clamp in here. And then this bar is the lever that attaches underneath the machine. So we're just going to slide that clamp over this bar underneath the machine here. And we're going to leave everything loose so we can adjust it later. Okay, now we're going to slide on the knee pad and just check to see where we want this, and this is going to be different for every person, the position. And while I'm doing this, I'm noticing that I don't like the position of the pedal at all, like I told you earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and move this really quick, and then we can get back to setting up the knee lever. Alright, one other thing I also noticed that I didn't like was that I had the foot pedal set too high, so what I'm going to do is just adjust the linkage a little bit so that it's a little lower and more comfortable for me to use. Alright, and that's looking really nice right there. Okay, here I'm going to start adjusting everything to fit my knee. So I like where that's sitting in this position for that bar, so I'm going to lock that down. Okay, now I'm going to adjust the height of that knee pad there. So I didn't really like it right there, so I'm going to move it up a little bit, snug it up and test it. Alright, so that feels a lot better. I'm just going to completely tighten everything up because we don't want this to move. Alright, now what we need to do is fill the machine with oil. And this oil was supplied with the machine, so we're just going to fill this up. And you want to keep the oil level between the H and the L. That obviously stands for high and low. Okay, so that's looking pretty good there. Alright, and even if you have a self-oiling machine, it's always a good idea when you first get it to manually lube everything just to make sure that everything is lubed properly. And these are all the spots that are recommended by Sailrite for this machine to lube. It's also a good idea to just do this periodically on your own, just to make sure that you don't have any problems with wear in the future. Alright, when I was cleaning up the workbench, I found that I forgot to install that lower belt cover there onto the motor, which it's not a problem. We just need to tilt the machine back. We're going to pull that belt to the side and just put the 3 screws in to install that lower belt cover. When you're doing this, you just want to, again, make sure that you install it in the position where it's not touching the belt. Alright, and once you have that part of the cover on, you can slide on this outside cover, and there's just one more screw that holds this in place. Alright guys, so you can see now that our table and machine is built and ready to go. I know that this video was a little long and maybe not the most interesting one we've done, but I did this for those of you out there that maybe you just bought a sewing machine and all those boxes showed up on your doorstep and there's a bunch of parts and it can be a little overwhelming. So hopefully this will give you some direction on where to start and how to get your machine up and going so that you can start sewing and building those great projects that all of you have. And make sure you guys keep an eye out for the review video I'm going to do on this machine, the Sailrite Fabricator. It's going to be coming out in about 2 weeks. I'm really going to put this through all the tests and do a good review on this for you guys so you know exactly what you're getting if you decide to buy this.